For Baptist Church. Welcome to episode 20 of our study through Galatians. We've hit chapter 6, last chapter, and today we're only doing 2 verses, and we'll still probably take 10 minutes to go through these first 2 verses. A lot here, especially verse 2. We're gonna really spend some time in verse 2. And let's not waste any time, let's jump right in. Brothers, or it's adelphoi again, so if your translation says brothers and sisters, that's perfectly okay. So just say, brothers and sisters, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. We're going to work back. We're going to start in verse 2 today. Because one thing I want to explore is, what is this law of Christ? We've mentioned it a few times already. That Paul he has used the word law. This is the 31st time now? 30th or 31st time now. And all but a couple times, the law's been used in a negative sense. In fact, the only other time I think it's used in a positive sense is maybe chapter 5, verse 14. But other than that, it's pretty negative, Paul's view of the law. And he's talking about Mosaic law. But in verse 14, it's a little different tone. And certainly here in verse 2, we have a different tone. One thing that all Protestant and evangelical Christians and even mainline and Catholics have to kind of work through is, how can we say we're no longer under the Mosaic law? We've got, Paul in this letter, we don't need to be circumcised. That was prescribed by the Mosaic law. Paul also mentions multiple times that foods are clean. We can eat, whatever we want. We can eat pork. Peter mentioned all foods are clean. Jesus himself said all foods are clean in Mark. So we've got 3 people saying it's okay not to do, especially the food law. The 3 sources of we don't have to obey that anymore. So why don't we have to obey the Mosaic law? Every time we do this, my phone rings. We're just gonna hit ignore on that. All right. So let's go to let's go to Matthew chapter 5. See, I've already got it kind of queued up on my screen there. Matthew 5:17. All right. So Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 17. Do not think I have came to abolish the law or the prophets. Well, that don't sound good. Does that mean we still have to obey the Mosaic law? Can't do anything on Saturdays and can't eat pork? Let's keep reading. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until the heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass away from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of these least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. I'm going to stop right there because we just read some stuff that don't sound good, right? What law is he talking about here? We got the law of the prophets, which we know what that's Mosaic law up here. He did not come to abolish the law or the prophets. That's the old stuff, right? Yeah. But he says he came to fulfill them. Abolish is like canceling. We're just going to stop it. We're going to cancel it. Fulfill, but Christ came to fulfill. Does that mean it continues? No. The Greek word here is a form of plerao, and you'll see. Which will go down here at this little dictionary. Look, I'm going to highlight in blue on the far right of your screen. You'll see bring to completion. He didn't cancel the Mosaic law. He didn't cancel what the prophets taught, but he did bring to completion. And he brings in something new, and that's what we're going to be talking about. What is this new? We're contrasting Old Covenant, New Covenant. We're under a new covenant. Christ didn't abolish the old. He fulfilled it. He completed. He brought it to completion, and something new started in its place. But if we look in these, like verse 19, for example, therefore whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. So is he talking about the old commandments? If we just stop at verse 19, he almost has to be. But Christ himself relaxed the old commandments, the Sabbath laws, the food laws. He relaxed those. So how can he can't be talking about those. Of course, if we keep reading, we get to verse 21. He starts introducing some new stuff. These commands that he's referring to in verse 19 are these new commands he is giving us. This is the things under the new covenant. And it's a little bit of the old, but he's put a new spin on it. Let's just start with in verse 21. Let's see what he says here. You have heard that it was said of those of old. So he's referring back to the old stuff. You shall not murder. That's one of those 10 commandments. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. Yep, that's one of the 10 commandments. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. So Christ is adding a matter of the heart. And you remember what we talked about the previous episode in Galatians. What Paul had commanded us to do was something the law could not make us do, and that was to love. The law could not make you love. Christ is now commanding us to love with this. If you don't love your brother, if you're angry with your brother, you're liable to judge. That itself is a sin. And he goes on to say, you will be liable to hell. They're going down to verse 27. Now we got a similar principle. You heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. Another 10 commandment. But, we got a but. I say to you, whoever looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery in his heart. So again, we got matters of the heart is sin. So Christ is expanding these old covenant teachings, the Mosaic law, to be a matter of the heart. You don't have to commit the physical act to break the law. This in the new covenant, which sounds like it's made it harder for us, but we're being saved by grace. It's not harder. Okay, let's jump back to Galatians. Okay, verse 2. We're looking at fulfill the law of Christ. So what is this law of Christ? This new thing that Christ has ushered in. Let's go back up to, well, we're already passing it, chapter 5. But, this is where Paul mentioned the fruits of the spirits. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, so on. Which is such there is no law. Law cannot regulate these. Law cannot make you do these. But it is the Spirit that enables us to do these. So through Christ, through the Spirit, we're able to do these. But we're going up to verse 14. We'll start to explore this. This is the other time where Paul used the word law in a somewhat positive sense. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Which we've seen in similar comments. Jesus said, mentioned this in Matthew. But also he talked about, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and so on. But Christ also gave us a little difference in the spin here. John 13:34, you see it on your screen there. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. The law of Christ is all about love and how we treat others, how we feel about God, how we feel about others, how we act to them. It's not about the law. It's not about keeping law. It's not about doing X, Y, and Z. It's about love. And of course, when we seen down further, was it verse 23 we looked at? We're enabled by the Spirit, fruits of the Spirit, we're able to do those things, not by the law. So what we are whenever, going back to 6:2, when he says fulfill the law of Christ, it's all about love and service. And we had seen that in, let's go back up to, where was that at? May actually been where we were in 14. Oh, right above it. In verse 13. Serve one another, but through love serve one another. This is part of the law of Christ. Remember, this was that, we talked about the Greek in that one episode. This is being a slave to one another. It is serving one another without receiving payment even. Of course, if you're doing that for each other, it's easy to serve someone if they're serving you as well. Easy to show them love if they're showing you love as well. This is how we're supposed to act in the church. This is how we fulfill the law of Christ. And there's other examples throughout the Bible of other things Christ have commanded us. But most of them, as Paul said in verse 14, as I go back up, you'll keep most of them of what Christ taught if you just do love your neighbor as yourself, or even expand it out even better. What Jesus tells us in John, that you love one another just as I have loved you. And how did Christ love us? He loved us enough he's going to die for us. It was a sacrificial love. That is how we fulfill the law of Christ, with sacrificial love to one another. And if you do that, you will not sin against your brother or against God if you have sacrificial love. And we're going to stop right there with verse 2. That's a well, maybe not. Oh, yeah, I almost ended it on you, but the use of the law there. Then we think of you break the law, you get punished. We don't actually have to translate that as the law of Christ. This could be the Greek could actually be translated as the regulative principle of Christ, or the basic principle, or the structure of your existence, the pattern of your behavior. You pattern your life after Christ, and I think that would actually be better if your English translation says that. Maybe you've got one that does. I don't know of one that does, but if the regulative pattern of your life, it must be of Christ, and you, of course, fulfill that law by showing love to others and love to Christ, love to God. And let's go back look at verse 1 real quick, because we haven't talked about it at all. If anyone is caught in transgression, you who are spiritual, even throw out that spiritually mature, should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch of yourself, lest you too be tempted. Many a times our brother or sister sin against us, and we get mad. We don't forgive. We hold grudges. You've got a command here to forgive, to restore them in gentleness, not to restore them with demands, even though sometimes they may have to do something to get that restoration, but even then we do it with gentleness. So today, just kind of a thought, something to think about today in your quiet time and your prayer meditation is, how are you fulfilling the law of Christ? Remember, these aren't necessarily physical acts. As we see in the passages we looked at, these are matters of the heart. Where's your heart at today, especially towards others? And even more so with verse 1, those who have, committed a transgression against you. How are you treating them? Are you holding a grudge? You keeping them out of your life? Or are you allowing them an opportunity for them to restore themselves to you and to God? What is your attitude towards them? And we'll end it there, and I'll see you next time.